up, TCK Potters? I'm your host, Sky Guasco. You are listening to the Candlestick Kids Fantasy Football Podcast. Please follow us on Instagram at fantasyfootball_TCK Pod and on Twitter at TCK_pod. You can find all of our rankings and multiple articles at tckpod.com. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get into it. What up, TCK Potters? Welcome back to another program of the Candlestick Kids Fantasy Football Podcast, aka TCK Pod. This is episode 375. We are only 25 away from 400. All of a sudden, I am joined once again by my man, Bobby Lamarco, aka Fantasy Football X Factor. Bobby, how you doing, brother?
Good, Sky. Ready to talk about some NFC. Let's see if we can do this really good today. Reversal of the free agency.
So exactly what are we trying to accomplish? We did this on Tuesday on the AFC. We were lucky enough to have our boy Smitty of the Fantasy Football Show join us for the AFC side. And, we did have the quote-unquote backward conversation quite a bit. It's kind of hard to stick to it, though, because once you mention a player, you want to talk about that player, but we're actually trying to have a different angle on that, correct?
Yes, sir. Yeah, well, really for example, we're talking about it in 2019 into the 2020 year. We saw guys like Stephon Diggs leave to go to Buffalo, and the impact that it had on Buffalo is great and all, but there was also huge fantasy implications for the Vikings. Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson ended up emerging because he vacated so many prominent targets. That's kind of the focus of this episode, is understanding when players leave, they're leaving behind some opportunities for those players. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And we have a bunch of great options for you guys.
Absolutely. Hey, before we get into that, man, I do want to make another mention, kind of a faux pas in the fantasy football world, I have to say, but I'm a diehard baseball fan. I have to say that my first sports love was baseball. I played t-ball at 4 years old. I was smashing dingers at about 5'6", coach pitch from the pops. I played wiffle ball in the front yard. I mean, from when I can remember. Of course, a big football nerd as well, but baseball really is my first love. Played a little college baseball as well back home in California. I see the Padres hat, the OG Padres hat, if you will,
yes, sir.
That you're rocking there for people not on YouTube and on the podcast. I'm a Giants fan back home in the Bay Area. Of course, the Candlestick Kids has everything to do with Candlestick Park, where the Giants played after they came over from New York from the Polo Grounds. My Giants fall early in the first opening day. They were up 6-1 on the Mariners, come back in extra innings. The Mariners got them on a walk-off. Padres are looking good, though, man. A lot of young talent, obviously. Fernando Tatis Jr. I won't get too much into baseball on this, but I kind of nerd out a little bit. You're a New York Giants fan back east, right? New Jersey, New York. So what's the coast-to-coast connection there?
Well, I mean, I'm just trying to be supportive. I moved out to San Diego a couple of years ago, and the Padres is pretty much all they got left when it comes to professional sports franchises. So I said, you know what, I'm embracing them. And I said, and it was awesome to see fans at the stadium yesterday, and they got a W. They're undefeated. So that's why I'm just supporting the only pro team really in the area.
What I'm hearing you say is you're jumping on the bandwagon of an undefeated baseball team early. That way you could ride the coattails. I hear you. No worries.
No, I hear you. You know me. The Giants were so good last year. I always pick the best teams, So
that's right. I can't tell you how long I've been a Buccaneers fan, man, but that's a conversation for another time. Absolutely. Okay, man. Well, let's get into this here. So what we're trying to accomplish once again is go through the NFC free agency. NFC teams. So these are players that landed on NFC teams. This is their new team, right? We talked about the AFC side of this on Tuesday. If you haven't heard it yet in the podcast or YouTube, make sure you double back. Hit our boy Smitty as well. Give him a follow. He was on that show. We are rolling, just Bobby and I, on this one. And again, the idea is to talk about the players that vacated and what the rest of that team looks like and what they might be opening up for those players. Okay, man, let's dive right into it here. Let's go with AJ Green. 32 years old, signs on a 1-year, $6 million deal with the Arizona Cardinals. But again, we're not talking about AJ Green. We talked about that last week. We covered all the AFC, NFC free agency moves for these particular players last week. If you want to hear that stuff, dial back a couple episodes. Right now, we're actually talking about it in reversal. So we're actually talking about Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins, his former teammates in Cincinnati. There's a lot of conversation that the Bengals might go out and get a Jamar Chase to reunite with Burrow. They might even go with Kyle Pitts. They could do another big move in the draft. We're not there yet. So let's first just talk about Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins and what AJ Green's leave means with him going to the Cardinals from Cincinnati.
Yeah, well, first off, he vacated. AJ Green was a pretty solid focal point of that offense, even though he didn't finish as a strong fantasy asset. They vacated about 136 targets, not just from AJ Green, but from a couple other players that left. So even if they do go out and draft a Kyle Pitts or they go and get a Jamar Chase, there's about 136 targets that they can soak in and give more to Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins. Now, the thing I want to talk most about these guys is what the Joe Burrow injury has deflated their value, because when you look at them at the end of the season, they didn't finish as strong as they probably would have if Joe Burrow played 16 games. And what I mean by that is, last year, Higgins didn't play week 1. He was actually wasn't even a starter week 1. So weeks 2 through 10 that he was actually in the starting lineup with Joe Burrow, he averaged 12 points per game, was the wide receiver 21 in points per game during that time frame. So he is a rock solid wide receiver 2. But currently he's being drafted as the wide receiver 23. So right now today, it seems like he's kind of being drafted, where he was as a rookie coming into the system. Now he's going to have another year continuity. We talk about this all the time, with more target upside, with more continuity with Joe Burrow coming back. This means that I feel like at wide receiver 23 best ball ADP right now, you're getting him pretty much where he at his floor. I think there's plenty of room for optimism. And then Tyler Boyd is another one. Actually, Tyler Boyd actually outperformed T. Higgins during the first part of the season. He was averaging 12.4 points per game. He was actually the wide receiver 20 during that time frame. And he's being drafted as the wide receiver 28. So that's what tells me is I think Tyler Boyd is actually an even better value, but you can actually probably get him a round or two later than Higgins, because Higgins was the flashier player and Boyd's more consistent. But Boyd was proving he was actually outproducing Higgins during that time. And I even excluded week 1 for Higgins. So it's not like I'm just pulling the data and say, oh, well, he didn't even play week 1. No, I'm pulling the data that Higgins actually started games from week 2 to 10. He still outperformed him. And Tyler Boyd's going about 5 or 6 spots behind him. So I think Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins are both buys based on their current ADPs, with AJ Green now at the door.
I think that's a great call. And Tyler Boyd kind of annually we can use the term disrespected. I think it's, a little over aggressive, but it's like that term you throw around drafts, because for when he was younger, it was AJ Green getting drafted higher and got injured, getting drafted higher and got injured. It wasn't until last year where we finally were like, okay, I don't trust AJ Green, and he was falling and Tyler Boyd jumped. Now T. Higgins, because of the new hotness, and rightfully so, T. Higgins is a beast, but Tyler Boyd's still giving you that value. And if you're getting him at a wide receiver 3 or a later wide receiver 2 disc, he can put up weekly wide receiver 1 options. And if this offense takes the momentum forward that we expect it to, with hopefully some new offensive line, Joe Mixon getting back, Joe Burrow coming back healthy, we should see another increase there in Cincinnati as well. And coming out of the draft last year, we talked about it, pretty much everybody across the board had either Jerry Jeudy or CeeDee Lamb as their 1 and 2. Nobody was talking about Justin Jefferson, so don't let them fool you and fucking tell you that they were. Yeah. But T. Higgins was my number 3. And I'm just hooked on those Clemson receivers, man, all the way back. Sammy Watkins, Nuke, there's so many of these guys that I've loved over the years. So love what they're going to do there in Cincinnati. And, AJ Green wasn't very effective early, but he got peppered, and whoever else steps into that role obviously can help. Now, again, if they bring in a Jamar Chase or somebody else skill level wise, that could decrease value a little bit. But as of right now, definitely look at T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd. Okay, man, let's move on here. I have David Moore. If you want to scoop up a little bit, we can. David Moore here signed a 2-year, $4.75 million deal with Atlanta. Now, he was kind of the third, fourth string option there in Seattle, moves to Atlanta. Of course, they still have Julio Jones, who, yes, got banged up last year, but he's not done yet. And Calvin Ridley, who is a top 5 receiver, in my opinion, in the NFL. They also brought in Hayden Hurst last year as well. So what does this mean for, in the other side of things? Again, you have the reversal of this. So what does this mean for the Seattle vacancies? Tyler Lockett just got a huge contract, which makes me believe that Russell Wilson's not going anywhere, first of all.
No.
Secondly, DK Metcalf is going to be there for the next 5 years minimum, and Tyler Lockett just signed up a couple more years as well. So they're locked in. But how do we feel about the tight ends potentially, and how do we feel about Chris Carson with David Moore being out?
So there's 144 vacated targets from Seattle as a whole because they had a lot of guys in that 40, and we've talked about this a couple times, in that 40 to 50 range. David Moore, Jacob Hollister, Greg Olsen, that had 40 or so targets that are all now gone, and it ends up adding up. And the thing I noticed too is this change in offensive philosophy. And I was really interested because I noticed over the years the Seattle Seahawks never really had three predominant receivers. They always usually have two. And I backed it up with numbers. So I looked at the number 3 option in LA because the new offensive coordinator comes from the Los Angeles Rams versus what Seattle has done over the last 4 seasons. And it's kind of what I found. And this is very important with David Moore leaving because there's the number 3 option could have a better season now with a more focus on a third option. So over the last 4 years, Seattle's number 3 pass catcher averaged 0.8 targets per season. Now the Rams during that same exact time frame averaged 84.5. So the number 3 option had a clear, much more predominant role in that passing game. And the great thing about the Rams offense that's coming over, it was Todd Gurley one year. It was Tyler Higbee another year. It was a receiver another. It was different types of players. So what that tells me is Freddie Swain or whoever the number 3 is for the Seattle Seahawks doesn't mean they're going to become that number 3. It could be Gerald Everett or Will Dissly or Chris Carson. I think Chris Carson to me among this group is actually one of the most interesting because he actually last year on a per game basis was the number 3 option in targets on a per game basis. So I think that Chris Carson, we saw Todd Gurley early in the McVay era have consistently 80-plus targets. And if Carson can get more of that passing game role, him and Carlos Hyde split more work than you would like to see. Carlos Hyde's now gone, so that's another aspect of this too. So I think Chris Carson, to me, along with the tight ends, really could emerge, and it's one of those guys can become fantasy relevant in 2021.
I believe in any of these other running backs. I don't want to get on too much of a there's too many hypotheticals in Seattle, and I feel like for the last decade, outside of Marshawn Lynch and Chris Carson, we've been guessing the running back situation in Seattle. But, I mean, DJ Dallas came in, rookie from Miami last year. Rashad Penny's still around-ish. I mean, they have other options there. Chris Carson did come back and re-sign, which is good. They believe in him. But he's not – I mean, he can catch the ball. He's a good pass catcher. But is there anybody else in there that you think might take over more targets maybe with a third, fourth receiver being out?
Yeah, I think it's more the tight ends and the running backs. I think in a lot of schemes, you do see that the tight end and running back correlation of targets is a real thing. And we saw this with Todd Gurley in the first 2 years when McVay was dominant, and then it switched over to Higbee in 2019. And then this year, there was actually still more of a prevalence on tight ends than running backs. So in that offense, it could be very easily Gerald Everett or Dissly that gets the number 3 most targets versus Chris Carson. I just personally think he has an established rapport, and he just offers a different dimension. I mean, Gerald Everett, we talk about him stretching the field a little bit, but they have probably the 2 best field stretchers, maybe in the NFL, I'd say the side of like Tyreek Hill, for example, Kenny J. But overall, but I'm just saying, like, that's just offers him a different dimension. But I personally think I'm going to be watching it. I'm open-minded. It's going to be Chris Carson. I'm open-minded to anybody. I think search just really shows is that there's going to be a third pass catcher in this offense could be fantasy relevant.
Got it. Perfect. We had a little bit of a freeze on your side, Bobby. Just a heads up there, just to double check everything in your connection on your side, but you are back and we are ready to go. Let's move on to Dan Arnold. Again, not really a sexy name. He's been around for quite a while. But he did have a breakout season with the Cardinals last year. Not a lot of opportunity, but did catch a handful of touchdowns down the stretch there. He was kind of a streaming tight end at a very weak position in fantasy football and somewhat reliable. I mean, most late-round tight ends are touchdown or bust anyway, and he was certainly getting you those. Signed a 2-year, $6 million deal with Carolina. But again, let's talk about his former teammates. Chase Edmonds now, who's the lone back for now. We all believe that they will bring in somebody else, but for now it's Chase Edmonds, Christian Kirk, and now AJ Green. We talked about AJ Green earlier, but we talked about the Bengals side of things. Now let's talk about AJ Green potentially getting opportunity in Arizona here. So Chase Edmonds, Christian Kirk, and AJ Green. No need to talk about Nuke. He's going to get his.
Yeah, and Nuke got his last year. So Nuke got 160 targets in his games. It's not really realistic to think he's going to go that much higher. He could. Of course, Nuke Hopkins has a career high of 190 targets, so it's been done before. But even so, even if he does get a 15 target bump or 20 target bump, this team's vacating 156 targets. And that tells me that, listen, Christian Kirk was kind of a bust last year. He did not perform like any. I was actually really high on him in the 9th round or so. And he didn't perform. So I think AJ Green stepping into this role, Chase Edmonds, I put on the spreadsheet too, because, like I touched on a bunch of times, the tight end running back receptions are kind of there's a correlation there, right? So I do believe that there is no replacement for Dan Arnold right now. They re-signed Daniels, who's a blocking tight end. There is no tight end on the roster that's going to step into any vacated targets really for Dan Arnold. And I do think that's going to open up more opportunities. Plus, this team has a lot of continuity. I mean, we could say what we want about Cliff Kingsbury as a coach. We're not sure yet. But at the same time, Kyler Murray's coming back another year in the system. DeAndre Hopkins, another year in the system. I think personally, with him constantly taking double coverage and drawing a lot of attention from defenses, I do believe that AJ Green is going to probably walk into 90 targets or so, whatever that is. And my personal thing about AJ Green was he was out for all of 2019. He missed most of 2018. And it's really hard to imagine him stepping right into 2020 after missing that much time and being a good quality receiver. He's going to have to get his legs under him. And of course, like the first couple of weeks, they peppered him with targets, but there was some productive games with Cincinnati. And then, of course, Burrow got hurt. And then it's really hard to judge him over the last 6-7 weeks because he's playing with a bunch of backup quarterback. So I think maybe it might be a little more optimistic on AJ Green because there's 156 vacated targets and DeAndre Hopkins is only going to go up a certain amount. And there's going to be plenty of targets for these guys to take up in 2021.
I agree. And AJ Green is somebody that I'm probably willing once again in redraft leagues to take in the 12th or 13th round because, again, as we mentioned in Cincinnati, he was peppered, couldn't make much of it. He and Joe Burrow were clearly not on the same page, and maybe he just wasn't clearly healthy yet. But, if AJ Green's able to continue – and look, he's 31 years old, 31, 32. He's the same age as Julio Jones. Both these guys are getting beat up. They're tailing off of incredible careers. But they're not completely toast. They're not 37, 8 years old. I mean, if these guys can get healthy for 4, 5, 6 games and they get the opportunity, I think they'd be fine. And look, AJ might have a great opportunity being a number 2 after a decade of being that number 1. Maybe he'll see softer coverages and things like that he can get loose. But he's not a speed guy. We know that he's going to be a possession receiver, so more of a PBR guy. I don't expect 100-yard games from him anymore. But if he can get me, 6 for 80 to 90 and a touchdown roughly per week on the upside, that's a great wide receiver 3-4, flex position, especially when bye weeks come around.
Well, I think another thing too with AJ Green is last year you had to put capital in him. He was about an 8th round pick. Exactly. This year he's picked 192 in best ball 1080p. So we're not even talking redraft right now. He's not even in the first 15 rounds. So we're talking about if you start hearing camp reports and he starts, building rapport, and we're hearing he's going to be entrenched as a starter, he doesn't seem like a bad pick in the 15th round. I think it's worth the upside. He's proven track record.
I agree. I love it. Let's move on here to Damian Williams. Sat out last year, of course, with the Kansas City Chiefs. They came up just a bit short in the Super Bowl versus Brady. Still just 29 years old. Signed a 1-year deal with Chicago here. Now, there's a whole nother conversation with the Chicago backfield now that Damian Williams is around. Had trouble staying healthy, but when he's been healthy, he's been effective, especially with the Chiefs there with David Montgomery. But let's talk again about the Kansas City side of things. Le'Veon Bell is still unsigned. He could come back. He may not come back, but they bring back Darrell Williams. They have CEH, who last year was maybe frustrating for fantasy managers because he was in like the top 7, 8 when drafts came around once he went to the Chiefs, which I think was just an aggressive oversight by us in the fantasy community. Like, not necessarily you and me personally, but I certainly didn't have him that high. But the community at large, analysts and people that have podcasts and shows like we do, saying that CEH is a top 10 back just because he's going to play in this offense with Andy Reid and that he's going to be Brian Westbrook, just frankly was an oversight there. Now, I do think he has a better upside in ceiling than he did last year, but the reality is we just don't know yet. Le'Veon Bell, again, not around, and he's past his prime anyway, but they do have Darrell Williams, who, look, he looks fine when he gets work, though. So Is CEH going to be a third down back? Is he going to be the main back? What do you see here with Damian Williams, who wasn't in the picture last year either, but now we know he's definitely not in the picture this year. Neither is Le'Veon Bell. As of right now, it's just the two backs.
So I lost myself looking into CEH. I actually was in the weeds, and I did it for us in the TCK pod. I did because, I was trying to understand. Yeah, no. So I was looking at all aspects, and the first thing I thought was, maybe he's not as involved in the passing game because of Darrell Williams. That's not true. He got more targets per game than we saw out of guys like Kareem Hunt. So that wasn't the problem. And then I started looking at his touchdown totals, and that's where things started looking really weird. He had 5 total touchdowns last year playing for the Chiefs. So that led me to look at his carries inside the 5. He had 9 carries inside the 5. He only converted 1 for touchdowns. League average is about 40% conversion rate. So that means that just on the 9 carries he got last year, he should get roughly 3 more touchdowns based on league average. So he was well below league average in that aspect. But another thing, he wasn't good in the passing game. Was he involved? Yes, he ran plenty of routes. He got plenty of targets. But when I looked at his the stats that matter, so yards per target and yards per route run, he was below average in both those. So league average, I'm talking about league average yards per target for running backs is 7.5. He was at 5.9. And yards per route run was 1.3 for running backs. He was at 1.04. So he's below in both those metrics. Can he improve? Absolutely. I think that's the thing about Clyde Edwards-Helaire is that he actually just wasn't good last year. And I think betting on the fact that they didn't bring Le'Veon Bell back, they didn't go out and sign a veteran, they didn't even keep Damian Williams. I think the Damian Williams release meant more to me than anything else because Damian Williams, we know, has a good track record in this offense. And I think them releasing him, I think that gives a vote of confidence for CEH that I'm going to buy him where he's going because all those averages are probably going to go back to the mean in the average category because I think he is a talented back. And then those touchdowns, they always bounce back. I just posted something about Zeke, what a terrible carries inside the 5 season. They always seem to bounce back. So if he gets more of those too, we're talking about a big bounce back year for CEH.
I agree. And let's not forget that, Damian Williams, in my opinion, should have been the Super Bowl MVP against my Niners. So definitely has the abilities, and for them not to bring him back gives me more confidence in CEH than I had coming into last season as well. And of course, he was a rookie last year, no combine or no preseason, yada yada. All those things I think give him a boost this year. Let's just not overcorrect there. Okay, let's move on to Jamal Williams, 26 years old, 2-year, $7.5 million deal with Detroit. So we've talked kind of at length about Jamal Williams specifically, but let's talk about his former teammates in Green Bay, Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. Aaron Jones gets re-signed, big money for him. He'll be fine. He'll get his, but he's not as much of a bell cow as I think it feels because of his fantasy stat line. He's just uber efficient and scores touchdowns in that offense. And A.J. Dillon, look, I don't think he'll ever be Derrick Henry, but anybody who has the ability to be 75% Derrick Henry on any given play or week is somebody I'm interested in, at least as a high-end handcuff.
Yeah. So another thing I have with Aaron Jones, I was actually pleasantly surprised. I think there was a misconception. I personally thought that Jamal Williams had a bigger impact on his touches. To be honest with you, it wasn't the case. So I actually looked at the splits from last year. He had 15 carries. There was 2 games Jamal Williams missed, but there was also another game he played 6% of the snaps, so I counted that one towards the Aaron Jones game. And I also looked at the games that Jamal Williams played. So it was 15 carries to 14.2. So there was a slight bump, but nothing crazy. His production spiked, though. He had 99 yards rushing versus only 73 in the games with Jamal Williams. So even though his yards, he's much more productive. I don't know what the reason was. The games they faced, it was San Francisco, Tennessee, your boys San Francisco, Tennessee, and Carolina. And when I was looking at this, I said, all right, that's interesting. Maybe there's something else. Why wasn't he getting more touches? Was A.J. Dillon more involved? Well, A.J. Dillon was more involved. Well, 2 of the games were blowouts. So that skewed everything. Sky, trust me, last night, your migraine ended up helping our podcast because I went all in last night on research.
You're welcome. I'm happy to take a Percy Harvin for the team.
That boy. No, I love it because I kept asking myself, I'm like, how is that true? And then sure enough, it was because 2 games were blowouts, and A.J. Dillon dominated touches in the fourth quarter. So that drove a lot of this as why it was almost a wash. Aaron Jones in the first 3 quarters pretty much dominated touches. It was the last fourth quarter where A.J. Dillon kind of basically even things out a little bit. But the other thing was, even though the targets didn't spike, it was his on-field usage that did. He actually him and Jamal Williams was at like 60-40 when it came to routes in the games that Jamal Williams played. He is a much more prominent in the pass game than A.J. Dillon, and was proven in the snaps. So it was almost 1-4 with A.J. Dillon. So I think that even though we didn't see the target bump last year, I think it's only going to help this year. So I think it will impact his passing game usage. He will be on the field more in passing situations because A.J. Dillon isn't as necessarily a dominant figure in the passing game. And also, Jamal Williams was just as prominent in the red zone. So I thought maybe, A.J. Dillon's going to get all the goal line work now and yada, yada. Well, Jamal Williams got a lot of the goal line work. He got a lot of carries inside the 5. It wasn't as clean cut. So there was nothing there that changed it either. So I think Aaron Jones does get a little bump because of the Jamal Williams departure.
I think that's a great call. And a lot of that came obviously in that snow blizzard versus Tennessee and whatnot. And man, Aaron Jones is fun though. And I picked up a couple shares of A.J. Dillon in Dynasty last year because he was thrown out to the weeds because of Jamal Williams or whatever. And it's weird because the Dynasty community is either like super pro A.J. Dillon or anti A.J. Dillon, which is dumb. You should never be that way on anybody. But writing in the middle has helped me, gain some easy value. He's a throw-in piece on a trade, and he's free right now. And
I need a running back too. Okay, we need to talk. I just want to be selfish for a second. Tell me what I can get for. I want A.J. Dillon as my RB2 because I'm in a terrible standard dynasty league. I have no running backs. So, what do you think if I offered a second-round pick? Do you think I can get A.J. Dillon?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And is that worth it?
I think it might be overzealous right now, depending on how you feel about the position. However, though, again, I feel like so. Here's how you got to think about it. Is he going to give you value by himself, or is he going to be at the mercy of Aaron Jones like Alexander Madison and Tony Pollard are? We know that Madison and Pollard can be week winners, league winners if one of those guys were to go down and they play the last 5 games of the season by themselves. We know that they're going to be 80%. Who they're filling in for. Can A.J. Dillon be 80% of Aaron Jones? Statistically, maybe, but they're just totally different backs. And I would think that the offense would have to change a little bit if Aaron Jones were to go down. But as we've seen, honestly, I just think that means Aaron Rodgers throws more. So I think a late second round pick, maybe. Early second round pick, probably not, just because I think you can get another stud running back or wide receiver coming in this draft class that might fall into an opportunity right away that you're not waiting on. But getting A.J. Dillon on your team, I think, is a good move.
So my thought about this is, though, Tony Pollard and Madison are different circumstances because those guys are clear workhorses. I mean, Dalvin Cook and Elliott are clear-cut workhorses. The Packers have kind of been not like that. They've kind of balanced it out. I think the problem with A.J. Dillon, though, is he's not the number 2 getting passing game work. Like Austin Eckler thrived behind Melvin Gordon because he was the passing back. Right. And that's what helped drive his fantasy value to be flex-worthy on a standalone basis. And A.J. Dillon doesn't do that. It's almost inverted. He's going to be the 1B, but he's not going to be the passing game back, which is a problem because he's never going to top 12-plus carries unless it's a blowout, and those are always kind of hard to predict. So I think that's my problem with it. I think the best-case scenario would probably be like old-school Tevin Coleman when he was backing up Freeman. That might be your best-case scenario. How
about Latavius Murray?
Yeah, Lat Murray that's actually probably the best one.
And Latavius Murray, if Latavius Murray gets 15 touches in the game, he's going to get you 80 yards and he can get you 2 touchdowns. We see it all the time when Alvin Kamara's gone down for a couple of weeks. And I think A.J. Dillon can get you that at least. Is he going to get you 80-yard screen passes? No. But he can get you, 16, 18 touches and 80 to 100 yards and a score or two. And it's a conversation for another time, but this whole conversation about this running back doesn't catch passes or can't catch passes is just not legit. Like this whole thing with Jordan Howard with his career is like he just can't catch passes. He can't. I know he's not really good at it. He's not proficient like a CMC or Saquon or whatever.
Right.
These guys are world-class athletes. I don't give a shit who you are. You can catch a football. It's just a matter of the athleticism to do it and make a big play out of it, whatever. And if you can't do it with ease, then they don't use you that way. And I get it. Right. But if Aaron Jones were to go down and A.J. Dillon is the guy and they don't have somebody else that comes in. And, look, it's an NFL team. They'll have next man up. They'll have somebody else taking snaps. I don't expect him to get 100% of the share at that point, but I do expect him to fill in pretty admirably. All right, man. One more name, and then we'll get to shout out to our boys at Jersey Jungle here. Let's go to Brashard Perriman, 27 years old, 1 year, $3 million deal with Detroit. This is going to be interesting here. Comes out of the Jets. He ended the season 2 years ago with the Buccaneers and Jameis Winston once Chris Godwin and Mike Evans went down. Brashard Perriman was the number one wide receiver in the last 5 weeks of 2019. Long career, though. I think, what is it? He's on his 5th team in 6 years, I believe it is, or something like that. He's bounced around quite a bit, but he showed a little bit. He showed some big plays last year with the Jets, which we know were a train wreck. So what's going on here with Brashard Perriman and newly added Corey Davis coming over from Tennessee to the Jets, and, of course, Denzel Mims, who was a high-profile rookie last year, battled injuries, a little COVID issue, didn't really get the opportunity. How do you feel about the Jet side of this with Corey Davis and Denzel Mims? And your boy Chris Herndon, of course.
And it's a great lead-in because I was just going to bring up Chris Herndon. All right, so the one thing that's extremely consistent about the Shanahan-style offense is that tight ends have been very prominent. I mean, George Kittle to Jordan Reed to, Chris Cooley, we can get all the way back there. And that, to me, is another thing I realized when I was looking at this, because I first went into this whole thing, Corey Davis, Denzel Mims, Keelan Cole. And what I immediately realized is I had to take a look at how does the Shanahans utilize their passing game. And that's where LaFleur is coming from. That's where he's been under for years. Over the last 4 seasons, so it's essentially since Kyle Shanahan took over in San Francisco, they have targeted wide receivers at the 2nd lowest rate in the NFL. So they are not a heavy wide receiver. And you could say that's because they haven't had a lot of talent. That's because they have George Kittle, but at the same time, that's the facts. I mean, and you can't say Corey Davis and Mims and Jameson Crowder is like a trio of wide receivers that demand the targets. I believe I think based on what I'm seeing, based on what I think, I'm going to be watching. I feel this is going to hurt. Chris Herndon, I know I got burned last year, I know. But I think based on the offense, based on what I've seen in research, I'm going to watch that so hard because we saw it with George Kittle in San Francisco. His 2nd season, he took off. And I do believe that because the vacated targets by the Jets, there isn't that many. It's about 120. I think that, to me, though, overall, I just believe that we can definitely see any one of these guys emerge. But I'm going to put my money on a position scarcity, like a tight end, like Chris Herndon, because the offense itself will feature any type of player, even running backs. And I think that's where the best money is. I just don't see Corey Davis and Mims and Jamison Crowder consistently providing you wide receiver 2 value in an offense, which I guess we don't even know if they're going to have the new quarterback or rookie quarterback and stuff. So that, to me, I think Chris Herndon's the best bet for fantasy.
So last year, you and I talked about tight ends. It was actually our first episode together. Obviously, we fell in love, and now we're happy ever after here a whole season later. And that was the infamous Logan Thomas episode that I've given you props on 397 times on the podcast. But during that episode, we also talked in depth about Chris Herndon. I know it's been kind of a joke and a tongue in cheek in fantasy circles, but I'm with you, dude. And I was all in. I drafted him everywhere late, and it blew up in my face and blah, 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 whatever. But I'm with you, man. And with the 49ers scheme coming in, you're right, George Kittle. And I love that you dropped a Chris Cooley on us for the OG players. Yeah. Absolutely phenomenal for the former Washington team back in the day. Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. Jordan Reed and so forth. So I'm with you there. And I would like to see Chris Herndon get the opportunity because I think he's extremely athletic. And if he can stay healthy and get the opportunity, I think he can be one of those late round tight ends that we draft in like the 13th round that nobody cares about. And you're kind of like, who the hell's Robert Tonyan? Like, why not? Yeah. And then all of a sudden he catches 11 touchdowns and he's the wide receiver or tight end 5 on the season or something. That could be Chris Herndon if, Sammy D sticks around or they bring in a rookie who just peppers the tight end anyway, plus the scheme and frankly limited weapons there in New York and lack of a run game, which generally benefits the tight end position. And
this is another thing. Forget about George Kittle for a minute. Okay, let's talk about Mike LaFleur's brother. He left, went to Tennessee, featured tight ends, Jonnu Smith, Anthony Ferguson. Then he goes to Green Bay, and boom, Robert Tonyan, top 5 tight end. Like, it's just, you have to sometimes just understand that the scheme And Chris Herndon to me is like, okay, we saw his rookie year. He had one of the best rookie seasons that any tight end had. Over 500 yards doesn't sound like a lot, but like nobody was doing that. Nobody's doing that as a rookie. So I think that to me, you have to watch the scheme, and that's why I think it's gonna. I hope so. I hope it happens.
I totally agree, brother. All right, man. Before we get on here, let's get a shout out to the homies at the Jersey Jungle, of course. You know, we've been big fans of the Jersey Jungle. They've been helping us out here on the TCK pod for quite a while. You can go find the Jersey Jungle on Instagram. That's where they like to be reached out to. DM the Jersey Jungle, the Jersey Jungle on Instagram. Make sure you use the promo code TCK to receive 10% off of one jersey and 10% off of two jerseys. 15% though off of 3+ jerseys. Again, that's the Jersey Jungle on Instagram. Hit up our boy Trenton, reach out to him. He's got a lot of stuff in stock, and if you look at his stories pretty routinely, he'll have a big list of new kind of flashy custom jerseys that he gets in all the time. He gets a big box once a week and he dumps them out and he shows everybody what's up. He just got these, like, if you're following the NBA at all, the Miami Heat, their jerseys this year, like that neon pink and blue. You also have the Golden State Warriors and the Portland Trail Blazers who are wearing jerseys that say Oakland or Portland across the front instead of Warriors or Blazers. So you can get some of those unique jerseys. Of course, they have NFL, MLB, MLS, even World Soccer and football for our international fans out there. Major League Baseball just kicked off yesterday, as we mentioned, per this recording. So you can feel free to get your Padres or Giants or any other team. Maybe you're a Dodgers fan, unfortunately, that is celebrating last year's World Series win, or you want to get on the train of a new team this year. Feel free to hit up the Jersey Jungle, DM them on Instagram, the Jersey Jungle. Use the promo code TCK, 3 letters, TCK, 10% off of 1 or 2 jerseys, 15% off of 3 jerseys with the Jersey Jungle. Bobby, if you had to, we talk football jerseys all the time. If you were going to get one baseball jersey, current, ever, all time, who's your baseball jersey?
Ken Griffey Jr.
You know what? Ken Griffey Jr. is probably mine too. Growing up as a 90s kid, it's almost impossible not to be a Ken Griffey Jr. fan. I'm going to throw it back. I'm a kind of a historian in baseball, an OG guy. I would love to get me like a Willie Mays, one of the old school guy, Hannes Wagner, obviously one of those legendary, just icon pillars in the baseball community. But Ken Griffey Jr., certainly guy. And, you know, if I'm going now, I got to lean Mike Trout. He's absolutely phenomenal. If he was not on the Angels, he would be a world renowned superstar. But unfortunately for him, he's in the wrong side of the Los Angeles market. Okay, brother, let's get back into this here. Once again, we are talking NFC free agency, but backwards, we're talking about the vacated teammates and positions that these players have left. Let's jump back into this here. Deshaun Jackson, 34 years old, a 1-year deal with the Los Angeles Rams, leaves behind Jalen Reagor and question mark. The Eagles have to go out and get about 4 wide receivers in this draft at some point. They do have Dallas Goedert. They're most likely going to get rid of Zach Ertz. They have, you know, Jalen Hurts, who I believe in, but there's murmurs even out of Philadelphia that they don't necessarily believe in him full-time. Do they draft a quarterback or move up or whatever? So there's minimal opportunity and minimal weapons right now in Philadelphia outside of Jalen Reagor, who last year was a rookie, but they've got rid of Alshon Jeffrey. They got rid of Deshaun Jackson. So, I mean, looks like wheels up on Jalen Reagor for now. However, I do expect them to fill in a number of pass catchers in Philadelphia eventually.
Yeah, so the thing with the Eagles, too, is the Zach Ertz is kind of a hanging fruit because right now they're only at about 81 vacated targets between guys like Deshaun Jackson, who barely played last year. But once you take out Zach Ertz, that's another 72 targets from last season. Now you're up over 150. And even if a rookie comes in, like this is kind of why we talk about this stuff. And, you know, listen, Jalen Hurts is a different style quarterback. He's going to run the football. He's going to be a stud. I think just from this whole thing, I'm drafting Jalen Hurts. I think, no, it's not a hot take. He's awesome. And I think if he's even outside the top 8 quarterbacks, he's probably going to be the biggest steal next year, even if they don't really address the wide receiver position, which we all believe they will. But for now, I think Jalen Reagor, even if they do go out and get a Smith, or I don't know if they're going to get Chase, or, you know, he's probably too early, but even if they go out and get Devonta Smith and They bring him in. I think there's still opportunity. So Jalen Reagor with Jalen Hurts. So Jalen Hurts last year, he led the team in yards with Jalen Hurts when he was the quarterback. He was second in targets, and he had the highest yards per route run with that team. So he was playing well with Jalen Hurts. I think Dallas Goedert led the team in targets. He's probably going to be your favorite play of everybody, of course. I think he's definitely someone in this scenario where I think we're all waiting on pins and needles for the Ertz shoe to drop. But I think Dallas Goedert is not going to get top 3, top 4 recognition, even though he should. He's in an offense with the new head coach coming in that loves to feature tight ends. We saw it in Indianapolis with Rick Sirianni. They're coming over. They love tight ends. They've done it with Jack Doyle. They had 3 guys who get like 50 targets in a season. So I think that Dallas Goedert, to me, of this group, he's not going to get top 4 consideration, but he's probably one of those guys that can flirt with that top 4 value if Ertz leaves. And I think that's something we have to monitor. Plenty of targets for Dallas Goedert. He was also leading the team in targets with Jalen Hurts. So he's that guy. So I think really number 1 of this whole thing is going to be Dallas Goedert, number 1. I think Jalen Reagor, to me, right now he's going in the 10th round. I think his draft will fall. If they take a guy like a Devonta Smith, and listen, I think one of my shortcomings, and I think this is what a good question for you is, do you think Smith, if he comes in, is an immediate 120 to 150 target kind of guy?
Oh, yes, with the pedigree. Yeah, okay. Absolutely. I'm going to bring this up here real quick. It's going to cut us off a little bit, but I'm just bringing this up here. Actually, let me clean up some banners. Pause just a second here. I want to take a look at this really quick with you here, Bobby. So this is the updated, and we didn't plan for this, so we'll just take a look at it here. This is the updated top 12 picks of the NFL draft after the 49ers, Dolphins, and Eagles made some moves last week in the draft. So just kind of running through this here while we're talking about the Eagles have the 12th pick now. You're talking about, is Smith going to be around? I don't think so. Jamar Chase, definitely not. Jalen Waddle, I think, makes sense, just having that Alabama connection. They could bring him in potentially. There's also, might be a little early for like a Rondale Moore kind of guy. But, it's going to be interesting. Like, do they go the Kyle Pitts route if he's still around and do that double tight end position because he's kind of a hybrid tight end wide receiver? So if you're looking on YouTube right now, this is the updated draft order after the 3 draft trades last week. We have the Jags, Jets, Niners, top 3, Falcons, Bengals, Dolphins, and number 6 now from Philadelphia. And then Lions, Panthers, Broncos. We expect 2 of those teams to take a quarterback, maybe even 3 with the Lions. I don't know about that high, though. And number 10, 11, and 12, the NFC East, the Cowboys, your Giants, and the Eagles. From the 49ers there. So, what are they going to be able to do at pick 12 is basically our conversation and what we're looking at there. And I just don't think that, those top guys aren't still going to be available. But if we see 4 or 5 quarterbacks, which people are talking about that we might, and we're going to get an offensive tackle, we're going to get a D end, you know how it goes, high profile linebacker, we could end up seeing some of these wide receivers drop into that middle first round, which would be an absolute steal.
So one thing I want to bring up too is Jalen Hurts. I think a lot of people are going to assume that because he's a mobile quarterback that they're not going to have as much pass volume. So this is me just thinking in my head. So I actually looked it up in the games that he actually started. Now remember, he didn't even play in the 4th quarter of the last game. So this is not even 4 full games. But we're talking about weeks 14 to 17 when he became starter. I just looked up. He was tied for 10th in pass attempts. So what that tells me is that there is going to be pass volume on this team. They are not going to shy away from throwing the football. It's not going to be a Cam Newton situation where we saw the whole passing game just crater. So I think that to me means there's probably going to be at least 2 pass catchers, maybe even 3 that could be relative for fantasy on this offense. So that's really important. Number 12, if they pass on a wide receiver, we don't think a guy is going to be 150, 120 target guy. Jalen Reagor, double-digit round pick.
Yep, and I like Jalen Reagor regardless. I really do. I think the talent of Jalen Reagor, I think, is there. And if they took like a Devonta Smith or some high-profile wide receiver, yes, they're going to compete for targets. But honestly, like if they're able to get rolling here, I think they'll be okay. I also don't think their defense is going to be as good. They've lost a couple key key performers in the defense this year. And if that's the case, then they might be playing a little bit more catch up with Dak getting healthy, your Giants hopefully getting a little better, and the Washington football team being a legitimate contender as well. So I do kind of like that for Jalen Reagor regardless. All right, man, we've buried the lead long enough. Let's talk about your boy Kenny G and what it means here for the Detroit Football Lions. So Kenny G leaves. Kenny Golladay moves over to your New York Giants, leaving behind Brashad Perriman, Terrell Williams, Quintez Cephas, Jared Goff. I mean, it's not exactly a super exciting group of fantasy receivers. However, as you mentioned consistently, there's opportunity now. The question is going to be, who is this opportunity going to actually go to with Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones moving on from Detroit?
So two things, and go listen to the AFC podcast. We talk about a lot about this with Marvin Jones leaving. So I touched on a bunch of this stuff about, Jared Goff loving to target the middle of the field. Why I think TJ Hawkinson's the guy that's going to benefit the most from the coaching change, from the quarterback change. I think TJ Hawkinson to me I don't think he's any top 3 tight end anymore. He's not going to finish his top 4. I think I'd probably low end tight end one like Hunter Henry was last year. All that being said, this team is vacating 334 targets. We can sit here all day and say they want to run, and that's going to not be – it's not going to be equivalent, right? So they're going to throw less, and that means it's probably going to still be, 200. So let's take off 130 passing attempts. It's still going to be 200 vacated targets for these guys to basically chop up to. And Hockenson already had 100 targets. So really it's going to be the two main guys that come in, Williams and Perriman. Neither guy has never topped 70 targets in a season. So that's why I believe that a guy like Swift and Hockenson can really flourish and build on their momentum from last year. But that being said, Darrell Bevell's not the most pass-heavy guy. So I do believe that this is probably close to 250 to 300 passing attempts this season, vacated targets. So I do believe that a lot of these are available, and I do think that Hockenson can build from last year, and I also think that DeAndre Swift can build on his passing game usage from last year.
How do you feel about my boy Quintez Cephas as the slot receiver? Because you've mentioned multiple times how much Jared Goff literally throws the most slot passes in the NFL the last couple of years. We know that Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp have thrived off of that in the Rams offense the last few years. Any vibes from Quintez Cephas?
Well, that's the thing, though. I mean, is he going to be the slot guy? If he is, yeah, you're right. Everything. So the thing about Anthony Lynn, thing about Jared Goff, they are a perfect harmony and a blend for slot receivers. You think
Keenan
about,
Allen.
Keenan Allen, and you have Cooper Kupp, and then even before that, it's Robert Woods back in the day when he was with the Bills. There was plenty of opportunities. The guys that flourish the most in an Anthony Lynn offense are hybrid inside-out guys. So guys that play in the slot, play outside, play yards after the catch. That's not Perriman and that's not Williams necessarily. So I do believe that if Quintez Cephas takes over in the slot, we've seen time and time again, Perriman and Williams are not volume receivers. That means there's plenty of opportunity for a guy like a volume receiver. And if Cephas is that guy, I think he's definitely worth that in the end of drafts.
Excellent. Another deep name for you all out there, and worth a look in Dynasty as well. All right, let's move on to Kyle Rudolph here. 31 years old, signs a 2-year, $14 million deal with the Giants as well. Leaves behind Irv Smith. Irv Smith came in last year. Everyone was very excited about him. Had minimal opportunity, but made the most of it for the most part when he got it down the stretch there. And Kyle Rudolph had kind of wanted more money or out of Minnesota for quite a while. So it was contentious. They finally get rid of him. He's out with the Giants. I'm kind of curious if you're going to, you being the Giants and Bobby, obviously you're making those decisions for our boy Gettleman. If you're going to keep obviously Kyle Rudolph came in, but are you going to keep Ingram as well? Or are you guys going to roll a 2 tight end situation? We'll see what happens. But let's talk about what Kyle Rudolph leaves behind and the potential for Irv Smith, a nice rising star there for the Minnesota Vikings.
So when I was looking at this, there was a 4-game sample size with no Kyle Rudolph in those games. And actually, ironically enough, Irv Smith and Tyler Conklin split work, and they both had 20 targets in those 4 games. So it didn't become a single tight end focused offense. It wasn't like Irv Smith became the guy. They basically just plugged in Conklin. So I do think that caps Irv Smith's upside even this year. I think Conklin they like him. It's going to be the same offense, and we kind of have proof of that. But however, What makes Irv Smith a low-end tight end one this year is his usage in the red zone. So Kyle Rudolph still was a feature in the red zone, and Irv Smith took a backseat to that. In the 4 games without Kyle Rudolph, he was second in the team in red zone targets. He had 7 of those. He only had 7 in the previous 9 games. So in 4 games without Rudolph, 7 targets in the red zone. And then the 9 previous games with Kyle Rudolph, 7 targets. So he got a nice bump, about double of what he's normally seeing, and he had 3 touchdowns in the red zone. So that to me and that's just 4 games. So it's on a 16-game pace of 12, but I'm just saying that's what we're talking about. He could easily be a 600-yard, 10-touchdown tight end, and sure enough, he falls into tight end 1 value. Absolutely
agree. With bigger upside, again, with this offense returning to form. Okay, let's talk about another tight end here, Gerald Everett. One of Lucas's favorite moves here in the free agency, 26 years old, buried behind all the weapons with the Rams and Tyler Higbee specifically. 1-year, $6 million deal with Seattle. But let's talk about Tyler Higbee now, the Lone Ranger, with Josh Reynolds also leaving. So right now it's Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, and Tyler Higbee as the main dogs there for the Rams.
So I advise every single person that listens to this podcast to go back and try to figure out if you could see the last 5 weeks or so of 2019. And that's the upside of Tyler Higbee. He was so dominant in 2019 in the latter half of that season when Everett went down. Now, the backup for Everett is like Modit or Samundit or something like that. He's a blocking tight end. Tyler Higbee is going to manipulate the targets. That's the difference between when we talked about tight ends, why we didn't like Higbee is because we knew he was splitting work. Well, now it's the complete opposite. I love Tyler Higbee because Everett is now gone. And now with Matthew Stafford coming in, this is some of the stats. So his targets to tight end. So last season, TJ Hawkinson, 101 targets. 2019 in 12 games, he had 59 targets. In 2017, Ebron had 86 with Matthew Stafford, 85 in just 13 games in 2016. So over the last 4 out of the last 5 seasons, he's actually featured a tight end in his offense. That's coming from Stafford. Now you add in the fact that there is no Everett and he monopolized those targets. That's why Tyler Higbee, to me, is probably locked in as a top 6 tight end this year, unless something crazy happens, of course. But I think Deshaun Jackson comes in. He's a great compliment lid lifter, but he's not going to demand 5 targets a game necessarily. So I do believe that Higbee is the biggest beneficiary of this, and I think Matthew Stafford has proven time and time again that he can support a tight end 1 in fantasy.
I agree. And I am excited about Gerald Everett likewise. And again, we covered him in another episode, but Gerald Everett going to Seattle with Russell Wilson most likely staying after that Tyler Lockett contract. I like that move as well. Okay, buddy.
Well, Scott, let me ask you this, Scott. Let's do this. Will Dissly, Gerald Everett. Tell me, who do you think wins? Go.
Oh God, it better be Gerald Everett. I'm going to put it out there. Will Dissly is super fun. If you listen to footballers, you know about Big Montana. I love the idea. He's been a productive player, but he has had 2 gruesome season-ending injuries. I just can't expect him to stay healthy. Gerald Everett hasn't had the opportunity to really flourish. When he's got the opportunity in short stints with the Rams, he's been able to do it. Another one of these guys that's kind of that hybrid, huge receiver, tight end, athletically, Jonnu Smith, Irv Smith, yada, yada. I want to see Gerald Everett getting 75, 80 targets with Russell Wilson, and seeing him catch 8 to 10 touchdowns. I don't think would be crazy thinking of it because we haven't seen him do it yet, but I think it's absolutely possible. Okay. 2 players left, and then we'll do a couple reserves if we have any. Curtis Samuel, 24 years old, 3 years, $34.5 million. That is some cheese to go play for the Washington football team, but we're going to talk about his former teammates in Carolina, Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore. The 3 of these guys it was kind of the tale of 3 seasons with these wide receivers. You come in, Robbie Anderson comes over from the Jets early last year. We didn't know what to do with him. He was kind of a one-trick pony with the Jets. Teddy Bridgewater doesn't really throw deep. What are we going to do with a rookie head coach, rookie play caller, yada, yada? And it was Robbie Anderson off the bat, absolutely on fire. Then DJ Moore finally woke up, and then it was Curtis Samuel down the stretch. So how do we feel now with Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore getting more opportunity with Curtis Samuel being out, and the potential here, if it bodes into your analysis, that the Panthers with a top 10 pick, most likely looking at a quarterback if that rookie is ready to go behind Teddy Bridgewater?
So I'm not going to – so the quarterback situation is still in flux. I totally get that. But what I'm going to focus on is what Curtis Samuel's leaving, the position he left. He was the primary slot guy, and they replaced him with David Moore. David Moore is not a slot receiver. He never was. And I think when I was doing my research, it got me very excited for Robbie Anderson, and here's why. So Joe Brady was a former coach under the New Orleans Saints for a couple seasons, and they featured a guy named Michael Thomas in the slot. Michael Thomas was a big slot player. Yeah, you might have. You might have.
I've heard of him, yeah.
If you were born over the last year, you might not have. So for those 1-year-olds, here you go. Here's some knowledge.
That's true.
So that was another thing. Then he goes to LSU, Joe Brady, and he features another great big slot guy named Justin Jefferson. And that got me to wonder, okay, is Robbie Anderson potentially – who would be the slot guy now that Curtis Samuel's gone? And sure enough, when I was doing my research, the guy who got the most slot usage was Robbie Anderson of the remaining guys. So between DJ Moore, between Robbie Anderson and David Moore, Robbie Anderson actually saw more time in the slot than those other two players, which leads me to believe it makes a lot of sense. They bring in David Moore. They could have easily went out and got a guy like Adam Humphries or someone like that to just take over a slot receiver role. Instead, they bring in a guy who's primary outside, which makes me wonder, can Robbie Anderson kick inside? Last season, he was sixth. Was it sixth or fifth? Sixth in the NFL in yards per route run from the slot at 2.39 yards per route run. That's an insane number. So right there, it tells me he can be a great slot guy. Plus, the offense is conducive of having a guy like him in the slot. So that's a stat. That's something I'm going to watch. Easily they can move these guys around like chess pieces, of course. But at the same time, if Robbie Anderson gets closer to a Keenan Allen type, where he's closer to 50% versus just 35, that's just more boost for his fantasy value. He'll be last year was the wide receiver 23, currently being drafted outside that mark. I think he could easily be a rock solid high-end wide receiver too if he moves more inside.
And, of course, he has the big play ability to take the top off as well. I like that a lot. And you would think that, it just seems like DJ Moore should be that guy, but I agree with you. And either way, man, this is kind of another one of those like T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd situations we talked about earlier. It's like, which one of these guys do you actually want? I'll just throw it at you. Which of those two receivers right now, Teddy B's the quarterback. They're going to bring in somebody else. I think we all agree, but they haven't yet. So today, who would you rather have, Robbie Anderson or DJ Moore, who is an absolute animal but doesn't score the touchdowns?
So DJ Moore is right now early best ball ADP, pick 45. Anderson 71. And I think it's a cheat. I'm cheating, but I'm going to take Anderson just because of the ADP. I mean, right there, Anderson for some reason is not being viewed. They just lost Curtis Samuel. Like, this is the point of looking at these episodes, and I think this is what my main focus, because you look at Robbie Anderson, he's being drafted in the 6th round in the 70s, and he was the wide receiver 23, and they just lost a key piece in Curtis Samuel and replaced him with a guy who's never been over like 50 targets in a season. So what that tells me is that I probably would pick Robbie Anderson. I was off DJ Moore last year because I just saw the volume coming down. That offense in 2019 was one of the top 3 teams in passing attempts, and I just saw that coming down. But I think based on price point, I don't think I'm buying more in that 45 range, but I'm definitely buying Anderson in the 70s.
I'm going to totally agree with you. Okay, let's get into our last name here. We got a couple reserves at the end. Adam Humphries, 27 years old, 1-year deal with the Washington football team, leaves behind A.J. Brown. Look, Jonnu Smith is gone. Adam Humphries is gone. Corey Davis is gone. They're going to bring in more weapons. They have to bring in more weapons to Tennessee, but the free agency is over. There's not big names left. They could do it in the draft, but they don't necessarily have a lot of capital unless they move up here with Tennessee right now. A.J. Brown is, bona fide stud, as we know. Is there anybody else here to even pay attention to until they make a move?
So this is the thing. The reason why I kept Adam Humphries in there, he's not necessarily a big name, and I totally get that, but it's more of a building off of the Corey Davis discussion we had last Tuesday, and we're talking about A.J. Brown. And why I think this is important is because we started seeing them use A.J. Brown differently when they lost guys like Humphries. Humphries was their slot guy. And the interesting thing about it is once Humphries left, we saw a slight uptick in snaps to the slot for A.J. Brown, but we saw a big jump in targets in the slot. So his targets in the slot, so they basically what Pro Football Focus does, they track how many times a player is targeted when they're in the slot. And before Humphries, he was about 26%. It jumps way over 40 when Humphries was gone. So they were featuring him more in the slot. He was getting that. And that to me is just fantasy freaking gold. Like when these stud receivers can face nickel corners and get away from boundary guys, love it. So I think that's why this is important. The other thing is, which I couldn't believe, is that somehow Adam Humphries in the games that he played was more of a focal point in the red zone than A.J. Brown. So that's the thing that's crazy. So Corey Davis and and Adam Humphries led the team in the games that Humphries was healthy in targets in the red zone. So that's a big piece of the puzzle for A.J. Brown. He needs to improve in the red zone, which I think we all think he can. He's a big-bodied guy. But that's another tick for him. That's why I still believe he's a top 5 guy. It just keeps coming. We might just talk about A.J. Brown to close our episode. It's going to be TCK Pod, closing it on A.J. Brown every time.
I love it. And you know what? I would love to close on A.J. Brown, but I have to give a shout out to my boy Josh Reynolds, who we haven't talked about much, but he is coming in. He was the 3rd string, 4th string guy between, behind, again, Kupp and Woods in Los Angeles with the Rams. He now joins the offense. So the Titans last season averaged nearly 400 yards per game. That was tied for 2nd in the NFL. And they scored 31 points per game, which was 4th in the NFL. So they're high-powered. We know that. Corey Davis, sure, he had his up games. Adam Humphries had a role. Jonnu Smith had a role, but neither one of those guys were necessarily game breakers. If Josh Reynolds can come in as a number 2, which he already is automatically right now, and they bring in maybe 1 or 2 other names, he could have an opportunity to be that Corey Davis of last year, and I think he's got a great opportunity to do so. So keep an eye. We mentioned just a handful of these later, late round draft picks that I just don't think have gotten a lot of love over the last couple of years because they haven't had a role. And Josh Reynolds is a guy who hasn't been draftable the last 3-4 years in fantasy football. I do think, A, he will be because he's the number 2 in Tennessee. B, I think he's just another late-round flyer that has big opportunity, big, strong, long wide receiver who has a just totally different skill set than A.J. Brown. And obviously the offense in Tennessee runs to Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown. But just keep an eye on my boy Josh Reynolds as well.
So I want to say this about Josh Reynolds, and this is the key thing here. So last year, Corey Davis is vacating a position where he averaged 11.5 points per game and half-point PPR. That was good for about wide receiver 29. So that, to me, tells me, okay, so he's the wide receiver 3 that they produced a wide receiver 1 and a wide receiver 3 last year. This team's vacating 224 targets. So I might give you a glance. I might be with this guy.
He's definitely one of my guys. And it's fun to get excited about the younger guys like Denzel Mims or Jalen Reagor, who are rookie, didn't have a chance and blah, blah, blah. Josh Reynolds has been around a while. He's just been buried behind 2 studs, Kupp and Woods. I think now he can get the opportunity there. So keep an eye on Josh Reynolds in Tennessee. All right, Bobby, did you have another name or 2 you want to get here before we get out of here?
Yeah, the one is going to be the departure of guys like Jerick McKinnon for the San Francisco running backs. Now, I know we've gotten burnt over the last couple of years between Matt Breida and Raheem Mostert and Tevin Coleman and, you name it, outside. And basically since Carlos Hyde, we've been burnt by the running backs in San Francisco. No offense. Love those guys. But the one thing I want to talk about was Jerick McKinnon doesn't seem like he got a lot of touches, but he was he was featured in the passing game. So he did play 16 games, and I know some of these guys didn't. But he still led the team in routes, targets, out of the running back position in San Francisco, and now he's gone. With Tevin Coleman also leaving, it really is going to start – we pray and hope that Mostert and Wilson can kind of take over. And there is some room for optimism for these guys in the passing game. So Wilson is actually pretty decent in pass pro. He actually was he led the team in running back targets the last 4 weeks, and currently his ADP is in the hundreds. So if Raheem Mostert is utilized more as a 1-2 back and they use Wilson in the passing game, which they did last year over the last 4 weeks, Wilson could be falling into some work. And plus he's a dominant goal line back if he gets passing game work. This is kind of that 1B that we were talking about a little bit earlier. The 1Bs that flourish are guys that are featured more in the passing game. That could be Jeff Wilson. However, I don't want to overlook Raheem Mostert because – Mostert, and so I did an analysis last year called the running back opportunity analysis, and it was basically a combination of researching points per snap and points per touch and combining those metrics to understand who are the most elite backs on a per snap and per touch basis. Raheem Mostert 2 years ago was like Derrick Henry-esque, like when he talking about how dominant he was. Now, I understand he couldn't finish the season. He played 8 games, but he was very good in those 8 games. But the thing that really caught my eye about Mostert is that he actually led the team in yards per route run for running backs at 1.71. And 1.71 yards per route run for running backs is actually really not bad. And you're getting a much better discount for him. He's going at pick 72 this year. So last year you had to take probably him in the 4th, maybe even the 5th round. This year that's not the case. You can probably get him in the 6th, 7th, maybe even the 8th round, depending on your league. So I do think that McKinnon leaving, Tevin Coleman leaving, you can't forget about your boys. And now, how do you feel about all that? Did I accurately depict? Tell me.
Yes. Everything is stellar. I just want to throw extra love to my boy Jeff Wilson. I'm going to just straight up call because it's on record and I can find if someone really needs to call me out on it. But a couple years ago, when it was Tevin Coleman came in for the big dollars and we still had Jerick McKinnon came in for the big dollars and blah, blah, blah. And I saw the year before that Raheem Mostert accidentally get a couple of carries and absolutely ball out. Then I was like, he was awesome. It was a Monday night game against the Raiders, and he was tearing it up. And he took a drive up the middle, landed funky, and if you remember correctly, broke his arm pretty much right about here in half, and it was absolutely gruesome. But he was done for the rest of the season. But I saw in that game, I was like, this kid's legit. Anyway, he ends up being the fastest running back play of the NFL. I couldn't trust Tevin Coleman, who never got it done with Devonta Freeman. Can't trust Jerick McKinnon, who never got it done anyway, and he's fragile. We've seen that. So I was like, Raheem Mostert's going to be my guy. Sure enough, he was. I think last year I called that Jeff Wilson was going to be that year's Raheem Mostert, which he was down the stretch until he got injured. Yeah. We also have JaMycal Hasty. Let's not forget about him. I mean, the 49ers just have the ability to turn out running backs in the Shanahan offense specifically. So I love Raheem Mostert. No shade. I think you're absolutely correct. Don't forget about Jeff Wilson. Don't forget about JaMycal Hasty. JaMycal Hasty's forgotten about and he's free. Dynasty leagues, go get him. Why not? Jeff Wilson's going to be a 10th round pick probably when it's all said and done. Scoop him up, high level league winning handcuff, and I think he's going to get work anyway because we know that Shanahan can run it. So absolutely keep an eye on the Niners. We're getting long in the tooth, man. If you have one more name, let's get into it.
I'm good, man. Honestly, I was going to talk a little bit about Adrian Peterson and what that could do for DeAndre Swift, but I think for the most part we've covered it in the AFC podcast. I think that really DeAndre Swift to me, in this offense, I do believe that his passing game usage, Anthony Lynn has utilized running backs in the passing game. We saw what he did with Austin Eckler over the last couple of seasons. Eckler was actually follow me on Twitter. I always post this random fun facts about what I'm doing with my research. And one of them was about Eckler's usage in his 8 full games last year. So I do believe that Swift's going to have a nice passing game usage. But I think Adrian Peterson leaving really opens him up as the primary ball carrier as well.
Absolutely. And make sure y'all do go follow my man, Bobby Lamarco on Twitter, FFX, the letter X Factor, FF, the letter X Factor. You can see it on YouTube right here. If you're not subscribed to YouTube and you're listening to the podcast, make sure to find us on YouTube, The Candlestick Kids. Make sure you subscribe, please, and hit the bell. Leave us a comment. Let us know your favorite NFC move. You can follow me on Twitter personally at my name, Sky Guasco, SkyGuasco. You can find The Candlestick Kids and all the TCK stuff on Instagram at fantasyfootball_TCK pod. Bobby and I have been at it for the last couple of weeks. We're going to get Dweez and Lucas back in the mix as well as we turn the corner into April. Very excited about this, man. We got the draft at the end of the month, and then we're going to get into some of this. We'll get the rookies landing, and we'll have more content around Dynasty and things like that once we get into it. Very, very excited, man. It's been a pleasure working with you the last couple of weeks, my man. Good luck to the Padres. Being in the NL West with you. I hope that you lose every time you play the Giants. Unfortunately, history tells me even when the Giants are absolutely dominating and the Padres are horrendous, they always lose to the Padres. So hopefully the tables will turn now. We appreciate you turning into the Candlestick Kids Fantasy Football Podcast as usual. Make sure to give us some love and tell a friend and a family member. We'll catch you next week. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. From my man, Bobby Lamarco, a.k.a. Fantasy Football X Factor, I'm your host, Sky Guasco, and we are out of here.